Long before European settlers arrived in North America, Native Americans had already built thriving societies, cultures, and traditions that stretched back thousands of years. The earliest ancestors, often referred to as the Paleo-Indians, are believed to have migrated from Siberia across the Bering Land Bridge into Alaska during the last ice age, around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. Over generations, they spread across the continent, adapting to its diverse landscapes, from the icy Arctic to the deserts of the Southwest. These early peoples developed unique ways of life depending on their environments. In the Great Plains, tribes such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche relied heavily on the buffalo for food, clothing, and shelter. In the woodlands of the Northeast, the Iroquois Confederacy and Algonquin tribes created powerful alliances and governed themselves through complex systems of councils and laws. Along the Mississippi River, the mound-building societies like Cahokia constructed vast ceremonial centers, showcasing advanced urban planning and trade networks. In the Southwest, the Ancestral Puebloans, Anasazi, built sophisticated cliff dwellings and irrigation systems, allowing them to farm maize, beans, and squash in arid lands. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Northwest, tribes like the Haida, Tlingit, and Chinook thrived on salmon fishing and displayed their wealth and social structures through the tradition of potlatch ceremonies and towering totem poles. Spirituality was central to Native American life. Most tribes believed in a deep connection between humans, nature, and the spirit world. Rituals, dances, and storytelling passed down histories, myths, and values across generations. Oral traditions served as the backbone of their cultures, preserving the wisdom of ancestors long before written records existed. By the time Europeans made contact in the 15th and 16th centuries, North America was home to an estimated 10 to 18 million Native Americans, organized into hundreds of distinct tribes and nations. Each had its own language, traditions, and worldview, yet they shared an overarching respect for the land, which they saw not as something to be owned but as a communal resource to be cared for. The arrival of explorers, settlers, and colonizers marked the beginning of profound changes. The first encounters were often characterized by curiosity and cautious trade. Europeans introduced new goods like metal tools, firearms, and horses, which reshaped native economies and warfare. However, they also brought devastating diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which native populations had no immunity. Within decades, entire communities were decimated. This initial period set the stage for centuries of struggle, resistance, adaptation, and survival. Native Americans faced not only the challenge of maintaining their traditions but also the overwhelming forces of colonization that sought to erase their ways of life. Yet, even in the F.A. As European colonization expanded in the 17th and 18th centuries, Native Americans were drawn into a new world of alliances, trade, and conflict. Some tribes partnered with European powers like the French, English, and Spanish, often seeking to strengthen their positions against rival nations. For instance, the Iroquois Confederacy became a crucial player in the fur trade, while many southeastern tribes engaged in both cooperation and resistance against colonial encroachment. Yet the balance of power steadily shifted. Colonial settlements spread deeper into native lands, often justified by the European belief in their cultural superiority and the concept of manifest destiny that emerged later. Native peoples were increasingly displaced, pressured to cede territory through unequal treaties, or forced into violent clashes as they resisted losing their homelands. The Revolutionary War and the creation of the United States intensified these pressures. Some native groups sided with the British, hoping they would limit American expansion westward, while others allied with the revolutionaries. Regardless of their choices, most tribes faced dispossession as the young republic sought new lands for settlers. George Washington's administration even promoted policies of civilization, encouraging Native Americans to adopt farming and European ways, often at the expense of their traditions. The 19th century marked a tragic era of removal and confinement. The Louisiana Purchase and westward migration brought the United States into direct conflict with tribes across vast new territories. One of the darkest chapters was the Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed by President Andrew Jackson. This policy forced tens of thousands of Native Americans, including the Cherokee, Muskogee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw, to leave their ancestral lands in the southeast and march westward to designated Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma. The brutal journey, known as the Trail of Tears, claimed thousands of lives through starvation, disease, and exposure. Meanwhile, on the Great Plains, the arrival of horses, descendants of Spanish stock, transformed native cultures, enabling tribes to hunt buffalo more efficiently. For a time, this gave Plains societies strength and independence. But as American settlers, railroads, and soldiers spread westward, conflicts escalated into wars. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Apache, among others, fought to protect their territories, leading to famous battles like the Lakota victory at Little Bighorn in 1876 against General Custer. Despite these victories, the U.S. government's military campaigns, combined with the near extermination of the buffalo herds, broke the backbone of Plains cultures. Native peoples were forced onto reservations, often on marginal lands far from their original homelands. Life on reservations brought poverty, hunger, and dependence on government rations, with little opportunity to maintain traditional wa. The 20th century began with Native Americans still confined largely to reservations, struggling with poverty, disease, and the loss of cultural identity. Federal policies remained centered on assimilation, with the Dawes Act of 1887 continuing to divide tribal lands into individual allotments, undermining communal traditions and opening millions of acres to white settlers. Many Native families lost their lands entirely, deepening economic hardship. In the early decades, Native peoples found few allies, but some reform efforts began to emerge. The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 granted U.S. citizenship to all Native Americans, though voting rights often remained restricted at the state level. The Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 marked a partial shift, ending allotment and encouraging tribes to restore self-governance. Yet progress was slow, and many communities remained marginalized. After World War II, Native Americans served in the military with distinction, most famously the Navajo Code Talkers, who used their language to create an unbreakable code in the Pacific Theater. Despite their contributions, federal policy again turned hostile with the termination era of the 1950s, when the government sought to end the recognition of tribes and dissolve reservations. Thousands of Native people were relocated to urban areas under programs that promised jobs and opportunities but often delivered poverty and discrimination. By the 1960s and 70s, inspired by the broader civil rights movement, Native activism surged. Organizations like the American Indian Movement, AIM, fought for sovereignty, treaty rights, and cultural survival. High-profile demonstrations, including the occupation of Alcatraz Island, 1969 to 1971, and the standoff at Wounded Knee in 1973, brought national attention to Native struggles. These movements demanded respect for treaties, the protection of sacred lands, and an end to systemic neglect. Gradually, reforms followed. The Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act of 1975 gave tribes more control over their affairs, while the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978 restored the right to practice traditional ceremonies. Native communities began to reclaim their languages and revive cultural practices through education, storytelling, and powwows. The late 20th and early 21st centuries saw both progress and ongoing challenges. Many tribes successfully built economic independence through enterprises such as gaming, tourism, and natural resource management, though not all benefited equally. Native voices grew louder in politics, media, and education, with leaders, scholars, and artists reshaping public understanding of their histories and contributions. Yet systemic problems persisted. High poverty rates, health disparities, and the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women remain urgent issues. The struggle to protect sacred lands and natural resources also continues, as seen in the protests at Standing Row.